On March 17, 2024, at 21 o'clock Moscow time, when polling stations closed at 20 o'clock local time zone in the westernmost point of the country in Russia, the three-day voting in elections of the president ended. Many people refused to participate in them and to support any of the candidates, because the current election campaign took place against the background of restrictions on the rights of citizens, characteristic of the martial law regime. In addition, the introduction of multi-day, mobile and remote electronic voting, the persecution of the community of independent observers made the vote counting process completely opaque. This is not an election, but an uncontested bureaucratic procedure, under the full control of the authorities. For many years now, Russia has had an authoritarian corporate system that does not provide for free elections. Moreover, laws have been passed that do not allow opposition candidates to have free access to television and the federal press. This means that it will be impossible to talk to people. So why participate then? When today it is obvious to everyone that with the participation of Vladimir Putin, he will win these elections. But let's look at the situation realistically. There could be nothing else but Putin's choice of the Putins, and it is unlikely to be in the foreseeable future. Elections are a means of political struggle between several parties that differ in their programs, legally cooperate and compete. We don't mean clowns, but real parties. In order for such political parties to operate, there must be an idea of compromise and coexistence in society. There has never been such an idea in New Russia. That idea has always been the opposite. Defeat it, destroy all opponents, kill, plant, incite the crowd, expel from the country. All the oppositionists turned out to be enemies in the eyes of the majority. Overworked teachers who fake ballots, proud dumpers and other participants in forgeries think that they are doing a noble deed. Tell them they're criminals, they won't understand you. The principle of everything to the winner is ancient, from the Paleolithic. If one tribe defeated another, they destroyed all the defeated men, and used the women to produce the descendants of the winners. Democratic societies are more complicated. Everyone in them knows that an election victory is temporary. Yours have lost, it's okay. We need to prepare better and win next time. For such a society to exist, a separation of powers is necessary. Independent apolitical courts, police and army. Independent government officials who can't just be fired. Independent press, local government, and so on. Behind all this is an ingrained public opinion about how society should work, which is brought up in school and family. Democracies emerged as a result of the forced coexistence of different powerful groups in one state. Supporters of the Pope and the King, Catholics and Protestants, different ethnic, racial, and territorial groups with opposing interests. They have learned through generations to survive together and cooperate, despite political differences. Where would this come from in homogeneous Russia? But if this happens, then how many generations must pass for the parties to become free, so that government agents do not beat up the opposite party, to the delight of the majority? In Russia, this will not happen soon, if at all. In the meantime, they are discussing their own special path, that is, serfdom and military delight. The first presidential elections of the then RSVO were held on June 12, 1991. Boris Yeltsin won a convincing victory in them, gaining 57.3% of the vote. From that moment, the history of a new Russia began, under the rule of an autocratic, eternally drunk and unwell president. He was genuinely amused, mocking the courtiers, because he sacredly believed that everyone around him should be happy, if only because they could serve His Majesty. His delight in power was endless, even to the closest people he treated ruthlessly and cruelly. Under Yeltsin, who considered himself the embodiment of the first emperor of Russia, the whole country began to turn into such a cathedral. The situation was similar in international negotiations. Yeltsin's foreign colleagues studied him well and knew that the contractual capacity of the President of Russia increases in direct proportion to what is taken on the chest. Having destroyed Odessa and becoming the Tsar of the new democratic Russia, Boris Yeltsin, once drunkenly publicly uttered his famous, "I am the king." Boris, the Tsar, immediately sold himself to Great America, and then there were dancing on stage and the surrender of the Serbs, conducting an orchestra and promising to get on the rails, firing Primakov for a proud U-turn over the Atlantic and much more. So on December 31, 1999, the phrase "I'm tired, I'm leaving" has become the best New Year's gift for many millions of Russians. And so Boris Yeltsin, who repeatedly promised the people to make Russia a powerful and prosperous country, suddenly found himself in a broken trough. Yeltsin was a coward by nature, and realizing that he would have to answer to the people for what he had done, he decided to transfer power to a reliable person. KGB Lieutenant Colonel Vladimir Putin turned out to be such a reliable person. Yeltsin handed over presidential power to Putin under guarantees of his personal safety, and I received such guarantees. As you and I know, Putin immortalized the memory of Boris Yeltsin and Igor Gaidar, and Anatoly Chubais was given a lifetime indulgence to live as a parasite at the expense of the state. But before handing over his power to Vladimir Putin, Yeltsin coordinated this with US President Clinton. That's how Vladimir Putin, with the approval of US President Clinton, became president of Russia. Smart Putin did not openly confront the United States. The new president began to successfully play the role of the two-faced Janus. In foreign policy, Putin seemed to challenge America and began to demonstrate his independence from the US White House. It came to the point that Russia and the United States allegedly became irreconcilable enemies, almost ready to bring down nuclear bombs on each other. In fact, this is nothing more than Putin's tactical game, his distraction from Russia's internal problems. And it is possible that the sanctions of the United States and the European Union are smokescreen. Internal problems in Russia are beyond the roof, and the people know about it. And what is happening on the TV channels? Not a word about internal problems. The talk show is only about Russia's external enemies. Now, just in time to understand the internal politics of President Putin. The first and main question: why has Russia's oil and gas economy been stagnating for 10 years? The second key question: why are the real incomes and living standards of the Russian population constantly declining? The third question: why is the gap between the income levels of fantastically rich and fantastically poor Russians constantly growing, and Putin is doing nothing to eliminate this terrifying, unfair gap? The fourth question: why did Putin bless the Central Bank of Russia for a tough monetary policy, which led Russia to default under Gaidar? Here it is necessary to recall what the monetary policy of the state is, and what it is in Russia. A classic concept. The monetary policy of the state is a set of measures implemented by the central bank in order to influence the level of bank interest by changing the mass of money in circulation. There are two types of monetary policy of the state. The first, the policy of cheap money, soft, expansionary. Expansionist is aimed at increasing the mass of money in circulation and reducing the level of bank interest. It is used in times of economic crisis to stimulate economic growth with the help of cheap credit. Second, the policy of expensive money, rigid, narrowed, restrictive, is aimed at reducing the mass of money in circulation and increasing the level of bank interest. It is used in conditions of high inflation, as well as in the recovery phase, to restrain economic growth. We are sure that you have already guessed what monetary policy is being pursued by the head of the Central Bank of the Russian Federation, Elvira Nabiullina, with the full blessing of Vladimir Putin. This is an expensive money policy that stifles the country's economic growth. This raises a question. In words, Putin calls for a miracle economic breakthrough, but in fact encourages the central bank in its policy to strangle the Russian economy. How to understand this? The explanation suggests itself. Vladimir Putin has become a loyal receiver of Boris Yeltsin with the approval of this president, and therefore continues to follow the course of Boris Yeltsin. And it just becomes scary for the fate of Russia from such very reasonable assumptions. Can countries develop without democracy? Yes, they can, as we can see from the examples of China and Arab countries. Not that people were happy there, but they live, work and produce a lot of things. Whoever can, gets out. Instead of democracy, there is law, and this is enough for business. Although Silicon Valleys are not visible there, it would be great if at least there were laws in Russia that would be strictly observed. But this is also fantastic.